Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
One thing you've written about is algorithmic bureaucracy. And the first thing that came to mind was like, we're never going to get rid of bureaucracy. It just keeps going. So tell me, what is it and why should leaders be concerned?
I think the risk we are looking at is that for many decisions we come to rely on machines, which is making sense because very often the machines make more accurate decisions. They have more data, they have more predictive accuracy. They're also black boxed, right? And the result of these two things coming together is the adoption of technologies that make decisions, which are typically more accurate than that of humans. But when they are not, or an important exception presents itself, it's very hard to get any redress. So that's really the nightmarish version of human bureaucracy is already like that, right? Try to pursue a problem up the chains of a bureaucracy, say in a government organization, and get what you want. It's very hard. But with machines, it'll be much harder because it'll stop at the first point. So there's not much explainability in a lot of these technologies we're looking at. So the risk with these machine bureaucracies is they really take the worst aspects of human bureaucracies and put them on steroids, really, which is they make it impossible to get redress, to get exceptions, to get explanations. That's the big danger with these.
Is there an ethical part to play here? Because automation can be scary. And how do we balance efficiency with human judgment, especially when algorithms start making more high stakes decisions?
So this is a vast topic, okay, but I think the point in my book really is trying to address a variety of solutions to exactly the question that you raised. So let's take each of the points one by one. So firstly, there's a class of decisions that we currently make which have ethical implications, and if we were to automate them, then we run the risk that we no longer control the ethics of the situation. And that includes things like making mortgage decisions, making decisions on parole for people in prison, but also decisions like do you drive or let your self-driving car drive, right? There's an implicit ethical decision involved there as well. So this and medicine, this is rampant, right? There's so much stuff in medicine already where clearly the algorithms do better diagnosis than humans. But for ethical reasons, we might not want to completely become dependent on. So that's a class of problems where human involvement will remain necessary, even when humans underperform the machine. That's not going to change, I think, anytime soon.
But how do you balance it? I mean, it's like, do you know when that balance is before it's already too late? I'm facing a lot with clients just doing, like trying to automate their IT, by example. And after they see it operating a while, they start to trust it. I can't help but think, when you get too used to it and you get too comfortable, all of a sudden that balance is going to sway towards the algorithms, and we could see some high stakes poker going on here. Yeah.
At some level, that's the same problem with any outsourcing decision. If you rely on a vendor, right, the vendor does it better than you get some cost savings, you're both happy. But over a period of time, two things happen. Your dependency on the vendor goes up, and your own ability to retake back that process in-house if you had to, that goes down. Right? It becomes harder to do it in-house if you had to. I think the best solution in this case is something that outsourcing experts have known for a long time. You never outsource 100%. So you might actually keep 5%, 10%, something in-house, not because it's efficient to do it, but it acts as an investment in resilience. And I think that's very similar for human skills when using machines. So let's say you're a diagnostician, okay, you're reading scans. You might rely on the machine to do 90 of them, but 10 you should do. Simply because that's how you keep your skills intact and that's how you are able to exercise a check on the quality of what the machine is doing. And suppose the machine goes down, then you're not stuck. So it's a very similar reasoning that we need to accept that some redundancy, some short-term inefficiency is the price of resilience. You can't have it both ways, basically.
No, I get you. So let me switch back to tech again. You talk about blockchain and metaverse applications. You implied a little bit about the metaverse, but how are you using those technologies around organizational design?
So with blockchain, as you probably know very well, Al, there's this huge interest around these systems called decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. So what they're essentially trying to do is combine human deliberation and voting with smart contracts, which sit on blockchain. So essentially what they're trying to do is they take away the challenge of how do you go from decision to execution. That's always been a challenge in human organizations, right? So the CEO might decide, but somebody's got to execute. And in fact, if the people who are executing are not bought in or haven't understood the CEO's vision, the execution will fail. So these DAO organizations try to solve that by making the execution completely algorithmic and let the humans essentially function in a peer-to-peer democratic way to make decisions. So I find studying them really interesting because they show us what could be. One can imagine that as more and more things can get automated, one could imagine algorithmic execution and human decision. And if that is a very widespread model that's going to happen, then these DAOs are giving us early indicators of how that can happen. So I think these blockchain technologies help to do two things. First, they separate execution from decision making. Second, they allow for more decentralized decision making. You don't need a hierarchical structure because execution is where hierarchy is important. Ideation is not where you need hierarchy. So you can really reduce the need for hierarchy. And they also have some very interesting components I'm quite intrigued by. So there's a core principle in blockchain, right, which is who gets to validate a block is essentially randomly assigned, right? That's the whole point. You shouldn't be able to forecast who's going to validate a block because that prevents you from taking some kind of unethical action, trying to corrupt the transaction or trying to sneak in a fake transaction. That principle of randomizing decision making turns out to have some very interesting roots. So there is actually a system of democracy called demarchy, and the idea of demarchy is we randomly assign a person with the power to make decisions for a short period of time. And you'd think it's crazy, but there's actually a lot of evidence that it works remarkably well in many circumstances. So, this idea that one can decentralize by randomizing decision making is something that I learned from my study of blockchain. And then I realized this is actually not new to humans. We've been doing it for a while. It's called demarchy. Evidently, the ancient Greeks did it. And we have kind of lost touch with that a little bit now because of the social prejudice against randomness. We think of randomness as the opposite of order, but sometimes randomization is very powerful indeed. And we also use it in other places without thinking. Random sampling, randomized control trials, it's all driven by randomization. Randomized governance, I think, is a really interesting idea. So that's one of the things I'm learning from blockchain.
Randomized governance. Say more on that. What does that really mean? Randomized governance.
You would decide who gets to make a decision on an issue by randomly picking a decision maker rather than by giving it to a particular named person.
Wouldn't you be better off aligned by skill? So I mean, so they've got to meet a certain fundamental skill criteria, and then within that skill criteria, then you randomize it.
Exactly. So you don't just pick a person off the street. You can sort the problem to the skill class, but within the class of people who hold the skill, we can randomize who gets to make it. So imagine what that does to all the politicking, all the backdoor lobbying. That's gone, right? Because we don't know who's going to make the decision.
Well, that kind of leads to my concern before. The powers that be, kind of what we were talking about earlier, the powers that be like that lobbying today. That's where they hold the power. They would have to relieve themselves of that power for that to work. Is there anything that we missed on the tech that you would like to really outline that supports the efforts that you're driving?
So in particular, I think I want to talk a little bit, if that's okay, about the idea of using these LLMs as teams rather than as individual agents. Right? So I think multi-agent systems are already becoming quite a craze, and we are seeing that in our world as well. So what I'm talking about here is not just automating a business process by using multiple agents, but not automating rather, simulating a business decision using a committee of multiple LLMs. So we're creating these teams of agents which are each trained with different functional expertise. One could be a finance expert, one could be a marketing expert, one could be a strategy expert. And we can have them deliberate a problem, right, and generate some insight through that deliberation. I think building these architectures where you have teams of agents, which each of which is a specialist based on a RAG technology behind the scenes, I think is going to be really powerful. So this is what we are trying to do in our work, but I know other people are building similar systems around the world. I think this is really a very interesting frontier to look at.
I do too. I know exactly what you're talking about. So let me again say it back to you. Essentially, you'd have different personas across interdisciplinary approaches like business, sociology, psychology, whatever, or in an organization, different functions, sales, development, product management. You have them virtually sitting in a room and debate a topic, and you see the outcome of that topic as a result.
So we wrote this paper which is called synthetic deliberation. So the idea of synthetic deliberation is you can tap the wisdom of the inner crowd, right? You're just one mind, But you can take the ideas in your mind and populate a set of personas and watch them debate. And often that can lead to more interesting outcomes than you're trying to think it all through in your own head. So our ability to kind of externalize our mind, parts of our mind into these agents is a very powerful thing.
Are you using that technology today in your research?
We use it in our teaching. So we already have
In the
sessions
teaching.
with senior execs where we show them how this works, and it's a kind of toy, right? So they enjoy playing with it. But I think they see the value in changing the way they make decisions as well.
I've been messing around coding a little bit myself to come up
Mhm.
with this scenario that you described. Do you already have something on that for individuals to try on your one of your bots that you make available, or your?
Yeah, we do. So there's also a demo version of that called it's called VCOM, Virtual Committee. So you should be able to find it.
Oh, I'll take a look at that. Virtual committee. And what is who is the committee made of in this case?
The user specifies. So the user can populate up to five personas on the committee and give them certain viewpoints and perspectives, and then you can just say debate for 10 rounds or debate for 20 rounds. And at the end, you can decide to take a vote or have them keep going for another 10 rounds. And you can just watch the transcript as they talk to each other.
This is crazy, man. So, but in the personas, do I have to like load any data for the specific personas that I create, or you've already got a background knowledge base at least for just this demo?
No, you have to do it, but you don't need to do a lot. I mean, literally, you're endowing the persona with a point of view rather than a whole lot of detail about their demographics. But you can always choose to give them.
I'm going to go check out your demo. That's awesome. All right. Anything else about the tech? That's fascinating. I don't want to miss anything.
I don't build technologies myself. I'm a user, but I certainly want to use these technologies in a way that improve the way organizations work. So I think the broad theme we are doing in our research group is, I would call it thinking with many minds. So how do you think with many minds, right? That's something humans do very well in committees and teams. But now we want to improve the way we think with many minds when some of the minds are not human. So that conjunction is really at the core of pretty much all our current research.
What new skills or mindsets do you believe leaders need to thrive on within this algorithm shaped world that we're leaning towards?
I think the number one thing simply is that they need to understand these technologies. I'm still kind of surprised by the conversations I've had with people in C suites who are really quite clueless about the rapid pace at which these technologies are moving and what they're capable of. So, the first order of business is just to make sure everybody has a basic understanding of what is different about modern AI from classic rule based AI, why data is so important, why deep learning has been so revolutionary, what transformers are. That's like basic stuff. You just need to know, I think. Then comes like some traditional management stuff, but now on a accelerated time path, if you will. In some sense, they have to start thinking hard about the skills they will need 5 years from now and what technology and skill trajectories they need to build to get there. Right. So we were discussing this earlier about people could use technologies in a way that de-skills them. That's bad for them. It's actually bad for the company too, because imagine you automate some novice entry level intern level work. Fine, that's going to be cheaper. Where's your talent pipeline? So you need those interns to be engaged in that grunt work to be able to climb the ladders to get to the next level. So this decision about what to automate is also one that goes beyond cost to thinking strategically about future skills, right? That's a very important thing. And the third thing I would mention is the independent of skills, there's a context effect. So organizations are social systems. They are communities, right? So people seek connection there. They seek a sense of autonomy, a sense of purpose. You can adopt AI in ways that destroy all of that, right? So imagine adopting technologies that basically become hyper snoopers. They essentially monitor people to death. Imagine using AI to make people's interactions less important. So instead of attending meetings, you can send in memos and the AIs will process it all for you. Sounds very efficient, right? So the
Yeah.
joke already is
I
many
wish I could do
companies.
that a lot. I could save a lot of time. Anyway, keep going. I'm sorry.
That one is very tempting, right? So the joke now in many
Yes.
companies is that the typical meeting is two humans and four bots taking notes. Okay, but that sounds like a productivity gain, but I'm not sure because there is also a strong human's need for connection. And part of the appeal of meetings is we go there and connect by complaining about the meeting, right? So I think we lose that
Yeah.
when we simply send the bots in to take notes. And the same is true, I think, for competence. So I think this is important stuff, by the way, because people don't just work for a paycheck, right? They also work for the context of the organization and what it gives them in terms of autonomy, sense of connection, and sense of competence. So even if you just care about profits, you got to try and attract the best talent, and the best talent won't work just for cash. So you need the organizational conditions to make it attractive. And I think the risk with these technologies, if you adopt them mindlessly, is you can lower the quality of that organizational context. So for top managers, I keep pointing out these three things: know the tech, think about the skills, and think about the context.
That's pretty good, man. You were prepared for that question. Nicely done. So bottom line, do you think we're going to have flatter organizations due to AI, or you think hierarchy is just going to take a new shape?
No, I'm pretty certain I can make three predictions with high confidence. Most organizations going forward will be smaller than they are today. So the future is mostly SMEs, is one way to put it. Everything will be a small and
I
medium
like
enterprise.
that.
Why? Because you don't need that many people, right? You can automate a lot of stuff. You don't need that many layers of management. Second, it will be flatter. There is no argument about that. Third, a lot of what organizations do will be like what developers do today. So it's really about ideation and coming up with new stuff, because once you have the idea, the execution is completely algorithmic. But the search for new ideas, new opportunities, new market segments, this still requires a heavy human touch. So most new organizations will be small, they'll be flat, they'll look like developer organizations. But, and here's the caveat, flat doesn't necessarily mean more empowered. You could have flat structures where one single super manager is over monitoring 500 employees. That's feasible, right? The technology allows us to
Yeah.
get there as well. So that's the choice that we were talking about earlier. Do we use the technology to create more flat and decentralized, or flat and centralized? That's the choice.
So answer this question then. As AI displaces certain jobs, because that's essentially what we're talking about, everybody becomes a SME. You're a researcher in this area. Do you think we're going to have to ultimately impose some social safety nets as jobs are displaced? I mean, how do we make that transition seamlessly?
So it doesn't have to come to that, right? It could be that all companies are smaller, but there are many more of these small companies. So net employment could even go up. So it doesn't follow from the fact that companies get smaller that there will necessarily be more unemployment. That doesn't follow. Now the risk is a real one that you're pointing to, and that comes down to the fact that if people are not able to get on the skill ladder to acquire the new skills they would need in this new economy, then yes, there will be unemployment. Universal basic income sounds like a great idea, but I mean, most of our governments already suck at redistribution. So the idea that somehow magically they will figure this out, and also,
Yeah,
I am not a
totally.
believer in that one.
Anything that I didn't ask that you wish I would have?
I guess you could ask about, like, what does it mean to adopt AI in a human-centric way?
Yeah, all right. That's a great question. Nicely done. You can be the host and the guest. All right. What's your answer?
The answer, Al, is in my book, which I strongly recommend you read. But I will give you the
I
short
will.
version.
I will.
I will give you the short version. I think, let me first dispose of what it is not. So I don't think it is sufficient to say that a technology that's easy to use is human centric. Right? You can make guns easy to use, but it's not obvious that makes them human centric. I don't think it is sufficient to say that human centric is a technology that solves some fundamental human problem like healthcare. There are many hospitals which are not run in a very human centric way. So I think human centric really is about creating an organizational context that is appealing to its members and they want to belong to it for reasons other than money. That's my definition of human centricity. And I believe it's a very real motivational driver for people to work in communities and connect and thrive. It's part of our evolutionary heritage. So for me, human centric adoption of AI or any technology is taking on technology in a way that preserves basic human drives like autonomy, connection, competence. So that for me is the goal of what we should be doing in org design for the next decade. Bringing in AI and other tech in a way that preserves those factors.
Man, super fascinating. I could go on all day, but I want to be respectful of time, and I will read that book. Look, I would love for you to send me the link that you described earlier. Where can folks reach you?
The INSEAD website or LinkedIn, either will find me.
Okay, thank you for that. Two quick questions before we end. First one is, what is one myth about AI in organizations that you'd love to debunk? A myth that's out there.
A very common myth, I think, is that AI will necessarily dehumanize organizations. People see it as inevitable, as if it's some kind of force of nature, and we have no alternative but to adjust and start worrying about UBI and things like that. That's a myth. Technology doesn't make decisions about us, right? We do. So I think that decision is very much in our hands, both as individuals and as collectives.
All right, you hit that one. All right, so this is very related, but a little bit different. What's true about organizational design that few people agree with you on?
Too many people think org design is something done in the C-suite with the help of McKinsey or BCG. They don't seem to grasp the point that if you understand that an organization is just any group with a goal, then anybody who runs a team, even if the team is three people, is an organization designer. And the reason I make that point very forcefully is my research shows that the basic principles are actually the same. They scale very well from teams all the way to 100,000 person companies. So that's kind of a surprising insight. And I've published my research, it's fairly well cited, but it hasn't yet percolated yet into practice to the extent I would have hoped for.
I thought that was the last question, but I got one more quick one. If somebody's ready to get into organizational design, they're looking for a cheat. I know there's no cheats. In other words, what I'm asking here is, how can I get started quickly? What would you, I mean, you got blogs, you got books, you got some of these bots. What's the fastest point to get up to speed?
At the moment, given all the work I've done, probably my book is the fastest way to get very quickly an answer to three questions. Why is this question important? What are the core ideas? And what's changing because of AI? So if those three things you want a quick answer to, the book is the place to go. Now, the most recent one is Rehumanize. That's the one that I want people to read.
All right. I got it. Man, thank you, Phanish, for being here. Fascinating stuff. I appreciate you spending your evening with us.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good to meet you.
Audience, thank you for listening. almartintalksdata@gmail.com. You know the place. Please give us feedback. Let us know how we're doing. Until next time, we shall see you on the podcast. Bye-bye.